Let us talk about JavaScript arrays. So far, we've seen how we can store data, and we mentioned that variables are containers basically for storing data, right? And just to do a quick recap, this is what we saw. You declare a variable name, then you assign it a value. And what you've seen is that we've been assigning them single values. So like this 5, 20, we've seen basically everywhere we've been assigning them single values. But there comes a time whereby you have multiple values, and these multiple values are somehow related to each other, that sometimes it makes no sense for you to declare them separately, right? Or sometimes if you declare them separately, you'll have a program that is so long for no reason that they apart, like it just shows you clearly that you need to find a better way to do this. So an example is you can declare a variable called, let's say, num1, then you give it a value 1, right? Then you can just have this multiple times, like for example 10 times, right? Then you have this here num2, 3, then you have num4, let's say here you have num5, num6, num7, num8, num9, and you can call this num10, right? So as you can see here, and this could be different values as well, but what you're seeing here is basically we're declaring so many values, and this is a lot of repetition. You can basically just, it's very clear there's a lot of repetition, and it makes no sense as well we are doing this. Now, one of the other things to just keep in mind at this point as well is that whenever you declare a variable and you store a value to it, it takes a certain space in memory. In this case, in memory in your machine, it's going to take up a certain space. And if you sort of do so many declarations like these ones that don't really make so much sense as well, you're doing so many of this when you can easily have them in a single sort of container, it takes so much space in memory, right? This is a concept that we're going to be talking about in a later video. But for now, let's just know that this is a lot of repetition that does not make sense as well. We're doing it like this, and we can easily store all these values in a single container. There are so many of these single containers, but in this case, the single container that we're talking about is what we refer to as an array, right? And an array, I just want to make this a comment quickly. So let's do here array. And when you talk of an array in JavaScript is an ordered collection of values, not collection of values. These values could be any data types, could be numbers, could be strings, could be objects, or it could be also other arrays. So you can have an array that contains other arrays. So just to put it simply here, it is an ordered collection of values, and these values could be of any data types. The good thing about arrays is that they let you group related data together, and you can also iterate over that related data effectively, right? So you can easily just go through each of the numbers in a more effective manner, which you're going to also cover later on. Now that we understand these collections, how do you sort of declare and how do you represent arrays? Very simple. So we are going to use a simple array literal syntax. So we've seen literals before, you know what they mean. So we're going to use a const keyword, and I'm going to have an array literal syntax of, I'll just call this array maybe fruits, and it's going to be an array of fruits. So think of an array as a list, right? So you have square brackets. This is how you represent arrays. So you have square brackets, then you're going to write in all the values, or in these values that you want. So for fruits, let's say you have an apple. You can also have a banana as a fruit. Let's add one more fruit. Let's say you can have a cherry as a fruit as well. In this case, we have a collection of fruits, and this is what an array basically is. A few things to note from here is that you use square brackets to represent arrays, and each of the individual values within an array is separated from the next value using a comma. In this case, we have strings separate from the next string with a comma. You can also have an array of numbers, and you can also just represent it the same. Then you separate each number from the next with a comma. This is one of the ways that you can basically declare an array and initialize an array. One of the other ways to do that is to use what we call an array constructor. This is a more or less common way, but we're going to just see still what that means. An array constructor. And how you use an array constructor is you're still going to use of course the keyword. So and then we're going to, let's say, have an array of numbers. So you have nums as the name of the array. Then to use a constructor, you use the new keyword, then you have the name array like that. So new array, then have a set of parentheses. Inside here, you can have your numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So in this case, this is what we refer to as an array constructor. In this case, this array here, this is the constructor. Anywhere you see a new keyword being used, a new, then some sort of name there, that's going to be a constructor. So in this case, it's an array constructor. So you can declare a variable using one of these two ways, but this is the most common ways that you see people declare and initialize arrays. And this is the one that we're also going to stick to mostly. So this is how you declare an array. There are a number of characteristics of arrays that you also have to note from this point. When talk of arrays, they are indexed. So what you mean by indexed is that they basically each of the value in an array has an index, or it has a position. Let's use the term position here. And these positions are zero based. What you mean is that the first value in an array has an index of 0. The next value has an index of 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So to try and just show you what that is you can, if you want to access a value, you can use an index to access a value. We're going to see that in a moment, but just to show you the aspect of an index, I'm going to use console.log, just show you that. So you can take fruits, then this is usually how you access values in an array. Use square brackets still, then you specify an index. So if I specify index 0, then we're going to save this and run our code. So in this case, it should be node arrays.js. You can see it gives us apple, which is at index 0. So that's one of the characteristics of arrays. They are indexed. In this case, the index is 0 based. They're also dynamic. What you mean by this is that the size of an array can adjust automatically. So if you add elements into an array and remove elements, the array is going to adjust accordingly. We're going to see how you do that as well. The other one main thing about arrays is that they are heterogeneous. What you mean by this is that you can mix different types. In this case, we only have strings, but you can have strings, you can have numbers, you can have objects, you can have many other sort of data types within your array. So I'm going to, let me just do this. I'm going to just list them out. The characteristics is that they are indexed. Arrays are indexed. That is one thing, and they're 0 based in this case. They're dynamic. They're dynamic. What I mean by this is that they can adjust automatically as you add or remove elements from the array, and they're also heterogeneous. What you mean by this is that they can mix different data types. You can have different data types within a single array. Now that we've seen this, I'd like us to now default back to just creating arrays. What we've seen so far, we've created an array that has values in it, right? But you can also create an empty array. Then you can, as we've seen, arrays are dynamic, so you can add and remove elements to it. So you can create an empty array, then add elements into that empty array. So how you do that is you, okay, let's, yeah, I'm just going to have a comment here and just call it empty array. And you can have an, I'm going to create here, just call it const, then I'll just use a variable like empty. Then you have just the square brackets and you leave it like that. In this case, this is an empty array. The other thing to note about creating of an array is you can create an array that is precised. What we mean by this is that it's an array that has a predefined size, right? So what you mean by size here is predefined number of elements that array should contain. So I'll just have here pre-sized, it should be an pre-sized array. So what this is going to do, just one thing to note is that it's going to be filled with undefined data types. In this case, undefined values. I'll just say undefined. So what this looks like is you just say const. In this case, you use an array constructor. Then let's say I'll just call it 5 slots, just for the lack of a better word. And then you just say new array. And then inside here, you specify the size. So I'll just say 5, like that. In this case, what this means is that we have an array that has 5 slots. Just to show you this, I'm going to console.log this array. So I'll just have 5 slots. And let's go ahead and run our code. As you can see here, we're getting 5 empty items. This is what this array contains, 5 empty items. And that is clear there. The other thing from this as well is arrays are iterable. We mentioned this earlier on. When you say an array is iterable, what you mean is that you can be able to loop through the array, or you can just basically go through each element of the array easily. And how you do that is you can use what you refer to as a from iterable. What this means is, let me just write it here. I'll just call it from iterable. So in this case, you're going to have an array. Let's say we have an array called letters. Then it contains, just say, let me use array, just say array dot, you say from, that is what you mean by from iterable. Then you have a statement like hello in there. So in this case, let's console.log letters. If you console.log letters and we run our code, you see that it basically splits each of the letters in hello into a different item within an array. So H, E, L, L, O, like that. So this is what we mean by from iterable. But now, from everything that we've seen here, again, the most common way of declaring arrays still remains to be using square brackets. The rest are also used, but they're less common ways of creating and basically working with arrays. Now, the next thing that I want us to look at, just allow me to, I'm going to just get rid of this console statements there. The next thing I want us to look at is how to access elements in an array. So I'll just call this accessing elements. To access elements in an array is the same way we've just seen earlier on here. So I'm going to create a new array, and I will just use const as well, and I call this array colors, and it's going to contain different colors, right? So let's say we have red, then we can also have green. Let's have red, green, and blue because they're the natural colors. So red, green, and blue. With these 3 colors, you can try to access them, each of the colors here. So just use console.log as well, so you can print out everything. You just check the name of the array, then you have square brackets. Then all you need to do is specify the index. So if I say I want something at index 1, I'll just do that. Then let's clear this and run our code again. So we run the code, you can see it gives us green. As you can see, green is the one that is at index 1. So remember, we said that arrays are 0 index. So the index is 0 based. So it starts from 0 and then 1, then 2, all the way. So you can also access index 2. But if you try to access index like 3, remember, this array is only from index 0, 1, and 2. Index 3 does not exist in this array. If you do that, you see that you get undefined as the result, because what it's telling you is you're trying to access something that does not exist yet. Okay. Apart from accessing them like that, you can also try to check the size of the array. The way you check the size of the array is, I'll just copy paste this and still use this. So you use the dot length. You just use the dot length method. Just say dot length like that, and then dot length like this. So if you run this code again, you can see it gives us 3 as the value. Okay, let me just replace this with something like 2. then we run it again so we can remove that undefined. Yeah, you can see it gives us 3. What it's telling us is that this array of colors is of size 3, that it contains 3 elements. So we have red, green, and blue. So it contains 3 items. You can also try to, as we talk about this, you can also, there's what we refer to as sort of negative indexing, negative indexing in arrays. So what you do here, you can just say console.log, then you have the name of the array, and then what you're going to do now is just say dot at, like that, then you specify and say dot at -1 or -1, like this. So if you do this, it's going to access the last element. So that's what we refer to as negative indexing. You can see it gives us blue here. You can also try to do the same. One of the most common ways that people try to access is just use square brackets, and then they do -1, like that. And if you run this, you can see you get undefined, because again, this is just a common mistake that people make when they try to access it like this. Negative indexing does exist, of course, in these arrays in JavaScript, but the best way to get it is just to say the name of the array dot add, and then you have this the set of parentheses, and now you specify the negative index. So if I say -1, what I'm referring to this is that I'm referring to the last element in the array. Then if I run this, you can see we get blue. Now if you say -2, then you run this, you can see we get green, because green is -2, same as this is going to be -3. So that is negative indexing in arrays. I do hope that you've been taking notes on this one as well, because these are some important concepts that you have to understand in arrays in JavaScript. So when you're accessing arrays, one of the things that I mentioned is arrays are iterable. So when you talk of iteration, apart from what you've seen here using from iterable, there's also using what we refer to as for loops, but we're not going to do that right now, because we're going to look at the concept of for loops later on. But just keep in mind that there's that aspect of iteration that also exists in arrays. One of the other things to understand about arrays is that they are mutable. We've sort of mentioned this. What we mentioned on this, one of the characteristics we mentioned is that arrays are dynamic. You can add elements to arrays. You can also remove elements to arrays. Right now, what we've seen is how you can manually add elements to arrays. Basically, you edit within the square brackets and you add your own elements. But there's some other methods that you can use to sort of do these operations. So we're going to just look at, I'll just create a comment here, and I'll call it, let's say, mutating. Yeah, I'll just call it mutating arrays, like that. So how you mutate arrays is we're going to declare an array. So I'll just declare and initialize an array, and I'll just call it num. Okay, I'll just call it numbers. I think we already have nums somewhere here. Yeah, so we already have nums. So I'll just call this numbers. And then we're going to have it as an empty array, right? And then this is an empty array. So how you try and add elements to it is you check the name of the array. In this case, I'll just say numbers. Then use a method called push. Arrays have this method called push. If I say push 0, like that, and then I'll just console.log numbers down below here. Console.log numbers. That is the name of the array, of course. Then I'll have that there as well. So I'll clear this, then we run this. You can see, okay, what is happening here? Oh, this is supposed to be numbers, not number. So that's why we're getting this error. So I'm going to clear this, save, then we run it again. So you see we're getting an array that contains only one element, which is 0, right? If you want to add more elements into it, you can just go ahead and do this multiple times. So I'll just copy paste multiple times. Then I'm going to have 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4, like that. And if you run this now, you can see it as an array that contains all these numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is one of the ways that this is how you add elements into an array. You use the method push. So it adds the element, but not that as much as it adds this element, it adds this element to the end of the array, right? The best way to understand, to just demonstrate this is I'm going to add values here like -1, and comma -2. So if we run this, you'll notice that 0, 1, 2 will come after -2. You can see now we have -1, -2, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the array there. So it adds elements to the end of the array. Note that that is what push does. Now what I'm going to do, I'll just get rid of many of this one and just leave only one of them. Run this again. You can see we have -1, -2, and 0 as well added right next to it. The other method that you can use to just sort of mutate arrays is what is usually known as the splice method. So what the splice method does is that it removes elements. I can actually just easily demonstrate this so that it can make more sense. So what I'll do is I'm going to just expand the size of the array. So I have it as -3 and -4. So I'll just expand it nicely so that it makes more sense as I do what I'm about to do here. So we've seen how you can push and add an element, right? The other thing you can do is you can use a method known as splice. So you can just say numbers.splice, and then you specify first thing is you specify the first index, then the last index. But now this is going to be the last index, which is like this but not including. So it's going to be index 1, the first index, and the second, like that. So let's just it basically creates a subset of this array here. So if you go ahead and do this numbers.splice, then if we run this, you can see we have -1, -4, and then we also have 0, right? What this means is that it's looking at index 1, it picks up the element at index 1. No, this is index 0, so it checks the element at index 1 and the element at index 2. So 1 and index 2 is -3. It removes these elements, then it leaves back -1, -4, and the 0 that we just already pushed here. That is what the splice method does. It removes the two items that you've specified at the specific index that you specified. So it will remove index 1, so remember 0, 1, and then index 2 as well, then add something else next to it. Now that we understand this with splice method, like I mentioned, there are many other methods that you can use in an array, and I'm going to just try and demonstrate these methods. We also have the .pop method. So the .pop method is the one that you use when you want to remove an element from an array, right? So allow me to just comment out this one for now. And then right now, we're going to just run this one more time. You'll see that we have 0 is the element at the end, right? So to demonstrate .pop, just type numbers, then you just say .pop like that. Then if you just say numbers.pop, then I'm going to just console.log one more time here. So just do console.log numbers, and you'll see that it's going to pop out this number here, or pop off. So you run this, and then you see 0 is no longer there in the new array. That was the .pop does. It basically removes the element, and then it returns that last element as well. Then there are also other methods. We said that when you use the .push method, it adds an element at the end, or rather to the end of the array. But if you want to add an element at the beginning of the array, you use a method known as the unshift method. So you just say unshift, then you specify, let's say we specify a number like 89. So if we run this code, you see that it prints the new array, but 89 is added at the beginning of the array. So it adds an element at the start of this specific array. Then when we said .pop, as you saw, .pop was removing an element that was at the end of the array, in this case, the last element in the array. But if you want to remove the first element in the array, you use a method that is called the shift method. So just opposite of unshift. So if we try to, I'm going to remove this 89, then you just say .shift, it should remove 89, then the array will go back to what it was normally. As you can see, it has removed the 89, and now this is the new array that we have, which is what we had from the beginning. There's also a method like we've seen, let's see, I've talked about splice, which is good there. There's also sorting. So sorting is when you have an array, but the array is not sorted. So you can use the sort method to do that. For example, we have -1, -2, -3, -4. Clearly, let's say we have this here as just 2, +2. As you can see, this array is not sorted, right? So to sort the array, you can just say the name of the array, then just say .sort like that. So you just call sort like this. Then if we run this, we're going to clear this and run it again. you can see the new array that we have is sorted. So it's -1, -3, -4, then you have 0, then you have 2, right? So this array seems like it is basically sorted. So it sorts the elements in place. It sorts the elements in place. You can also try to reverse the order of those elements as well if you wanted to. So if you want to reverse the order of the elements, I'll actually just do this right below sort. You can just say numbers dot reverse. So reverse is the method that you use. And if you run this as well, you see that it reverses the order. This is the order that we have. This one is the reversed order of the same. So it basically reverses the order of all of these elements that we have here. So those are some of the ways that you can use to mutate, to mutate your arrays. There are also many other methods that you can work with when you're using arrays that do not sort of mutate the arrays. But those are methods that you're going to learn as we proceed further because they require sort of more knowledge than what you've covered at this point. But that is basically it as far as arrays are concerned at this point. Again, I'm going to just repeat on this as well from the few things that we mentioned from earlier on. We mentioned that arrays are an ordered collection of values, and they have a number of characteristics. They're indexed, and the index starts from 0. They're dynamic. You can add and remove elements from the arrays as much as you want. They're also heterogeneous, whereby you can have an array that contains multiple data types. You can have a string, you can have a boolean, you can have a number, as many of the data types as you want. Then you've also seen how you declare an empty array. You've seen how to create a pre-sized array, and how to use a from iterable. We've also seen how you can access elements. You've seen how you can mutate arrays as well in multiple ways here. Now, I'm very much aware at this point that a lot of the things that we've seen here, again, they also sort of seem as different pieces that at some point they do not make sense how they work together. But again, as I repeated in the last video as well, I promise that they're all going to make sense as we proceed. If they seem overwhelming, that is okay. It's pretty normal. Just try to take them a little bit slow. Write the notes down, and then as much repetition as you do, as these things are going to make a lot more sense later on. Now I'm going to give you an exercise, a very simple one. So when we talked about arrays earlier on, we mentioned when we starting rather, we mentioned that arrays can take in a number of elements. They can take in string, they can take in many other things. But one of the main things that we mentioned is that arrays can take in other arrays as as elements, right? So your exercise here is pretty simple. I want you to write an array. So I want you to write an array. Write an array of arrays. Basically, I want you to write an array that contains other arrays as elements. I challenge you to just try it first. Try it with the knowledge that you have so far as and it comes to how we declare arrays. Then, if it doesn't make sense, or once you've just sort of tried and pushed yourself to a point where you feel that you've done this, if it doesn't make sense again, please feel free to just Google it out. Google is one of the skills that you also need to learn in this process as well. So do that, and I'll see you in the next one.